You could say the tradition is as old as the U.S. itself. The Constitution requires the president to address Congress on the State of the Union from, quote, time to time. The yearly speech was first known as the annual message and wasn't officially called the State of the Union address until 1947. Originally, it was a lengthy report on the executive branch and also focused on the budget and economy. But it was in 1913 when President Woodrow Wilson turned it into a platform to rally support for his agenda. So how much time should you set aside if you plan to watch the whole thing? Well, last year, President Trump's speech lasted 1 hour and 22 minutes, and that's not even the longest one in history. Former President Bill Clinton holds that record at just shy of 1 hour and 29 minutes. And that's connecting the dots.